Why, yes, there are other sci-fi podcasts on the web, but they talk about Star Wars, Star Trek, or Doctor Who and pretend they're really into sci-fi. They know nothing. This is Unpopular Sci-Fi, an Atomic Future podcast. Your host is an absolute sci-fi nerd. He knows and talks about anything and everything sci-fi. Sci-fi movies, shows, video games, and not only that, but he digs deep. Welcome in to Unpopular Sci-Fi, an Atomic Future podcast. And now your host, RJ Cervantes.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Unpopular Sci-Fi. Or does the pilot count as the first episode? I don't know. I'm not going to think about it. If you guys listened to the pilot, you read the description, and if you read the description, you will know that the Mothra episode was a re-upload. To make a long story short, I had the idea for this podcast last year. I wanted to talk about lesser known sci-fi films. What ended up happening was me having a mental breakdown, which resulted in me losing my motivation to do anything. Cut to now, 2023, I have found my motivation again. I want to see where my podcast career will take me. Before I get into the topic of the show, I have two rules for the show. The first rule, no popular sci-fi media. So that means no Star Wars, which isn't sci-fi, no Star Trek, and no Doctor Who. The goal of this show is to highlight underrated sci-fi media. I may break the rules sometimes, but it has to be unpopular for me to talk about. For example, I do have plans on talking about the Peter Cushing Doctor Who movies and the animated Star Trek show, the first one that I think that came out during the 70s. The second rule, nothing is off the table. Genre rise. Since cross genres are a thing, I will talk about sci-fi horror, comical sci-fi, etc. Now that the rules are set, let's talk about Space Invaders.
Our friends, as they take off on an adventure that's not quite out of this world.
Who taught you to drive, you moron?
Spaced Invaders.
We did win, didn't we?
Space Invaders is a 1990 movie directed by Patrick Reed Johnson. This is his directorial debut. If you don't know who he is, I don't blame you. He has a short filmography. His other films are Baby's Day Out, Angus, When Good Ghouls Go Bad, The Genesis Code, and 5/22/77. According to Patrick himself, he got the idea for the flick from another movie called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming.
The inspiration for this for me was The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, but with Little Green Men. That was the basic idea. We wanted a tiny little town, utterly unequipped for the reality, let alone unequipped for what they think is going wrong.
In the film, a sheriff named Sam Huxley, played by Douglas Barr, has moved to Big Bean, Illinois from Chicago with his daughter, Kathy, played by Ariana Richards. Big Bean isn't a real place, which is strange because Chicago does have Cloud Gate, which is also known as the Big Bean. I wonder why the writers didn't just use some real small town in Chicago. Not that it matters because the film was shot in Southern California. You can even see the palm trees reflection in some of the shop's mirrors at the beginning of the film. Well, not really, because this is an audio podcast, not a video podcast. Kathy is not taking the move too well as she misses Chicago and her mother, who passed away in May. Meanwhile, in outer space, the Martian race wages a war with an alien race named Arcturus. We don't know what they look like because the film had a $2 million budget. While the fight is happening, a group of wannabe soldiers from the Civilian Asteroid Patrol consists of Blazy, played by Kevin Thompson, Captain Bippo, played by Jimmy Briscoe, but voiced by Jeff Rinkless, Corporal Prez, played by Tony Cox, but voiced by Tony Pope, Dr. Ziploc, played by Debbie Lee Carrington, but voiced by Joe Axley, and Lieutenant Guinea Rig, played by Tony Madden, but voiced by Bruce Lanoid. I probably pronounced these names wrong, I'm sorry. Intercepts a signal from Earth. The signal happens to be a rebroadcasting of the 1938 radio drama War of the Worlds. Sorry for the info dumping, but I have to give credit to the actors. Fun fact, the film was in production in 1988, which happens to be the 50th anniversary of the broadcast.
We started production on October 31st.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That was
of
a
1989. Literally the 50th.
88.
88. Sorry.
Right. So
right.
That was the actual 50th anniversary
of the War of the Worlds broadcast. We started that night, around the 50th.
Right.
Yeah,
but the actual shooting wasn't supposed to start for another week because we needed the time for this video to be processed into what you see here.
Right.
Upon landing in Big Bend, Illinois on Halloween night, hijinks ensue. I consider this a Proto-Inavder Zim. Why? Because the flick and show has a few things in common. Both properties have overconfident extraterrestrials, not too sharp humans, and kids that knows what's going on. I'm not the only one who thinks this. One of the filmmakers shares the same idea.
Rumor has it that the Invader Zim creators were highly motivated by this film.
Really?
And that Spiff had a big influence on them. So,
while I do prefer Invader Zim, I would be lying if I say I didn't enjoy Space Invaders. Sure, it's not 2001 Space Odyssey or Terminator 2 Judgment Day good, but my philosophy is a forgettable movie is worse than a boring one. At least with a boring movie, I remember it. A forgettable movie, on the other hand, I have to use my real power to remember something. Could it be better? Sure. As I said, the film did have a $2 million budget, and because of this, sacrifices have to be made, such as a subplot about a group of senior citizens tracking down the Martians and a love interest played by Tanya Lee Williams, who happens to receive credit in the opening scene when her only screen time is dressing up as Lieutenant Uhura. What I like about the film is the special effects and the costumes of the aliens. You'd be amazed at what the filmmakers can do with such a low budget. Some locations were models. To hide this, the filmmakers filmed them as ride shots. One shot was poorly filmed. When I saw this shot, I knew I was looking at a built model. My favorite character of the movie is Blasey. Not only he's the smart one in the group, but he's cool as Jack. Jack Nicholson cool.
I auditioned for each character, doing a different accent for each one. But when I started reading Blasney, I just channeled everybody's inner Jack Nicholson. And it was one of the greatest auditions I had ever done because in the middle of the audition, he stopped the audition and I couldn't believe it. But the thing was, I was Jack and I was Blasney. And Patrick said, "No need to go on with the audition anymore. You got the job." The outfit itself was just, hey, it was cool. I had parachute pants and a bomber jacket and a Laker shirt. I was a big Laker fan. That's what we decided. Jack's such a great Laker fan that, hey, why not have a Laker shirt?
I don't have any complaints. Well, I do have a nitpick. That is, the aliens are wearing human clothing with branding, like the Lakers logo. Have they been to Earth before? The movie never explains this. They even wear glasses, but they have no ears. Blasey was wearing 3D glasses when they crash-landed on Earth. Space Invaders didn't do great with critics. The film sits at an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, and film historian Leonard Marlin gave the film 1.5 out of 4, saying, "Criminally overlong. It all makes you wonder why Ocean Worlds couldn't get financing for decades, while pictures like this one are produced by the truckload." That was harsh. I'm not the type of person who hates critics or Rotten Tomatoes. In fact, I don't get huffy when that site or critics like a movie that I don't like or vice versa, unlike a lot of movie fans. And I know how Rotten Tomatoes work, but I agree. There are some movies I don't like, and I sit down and think, Hollywood has a pile of scripts, yet this movie gets made? Despite the fact that it didn't do well with critics, it did gain a cult following. And I happen to be a part of that following. If you type Space Invaders in Google Images, you can see fan art of this movie. Not a lot, but fan art does exist. Even Steven Spielberg likes this flick. If he didn't see this, then Ariana Richards probably would never got the role of Lex in Jurassic Park.
David his score is unbelievable.
Most definitely.
And I remember Steven Spielberg commenting on it when he first saw the film. He just absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you doing here?
You can see why Steven when he saw this film, and he said to me, the first thing he said when we talked about it was, "Who is she? Where did you find her? I've got to find a way to work with her." And this was a year before Jurassic Park.
Well, of course, she's brilliant in that.
Yeah.
Excuse me, brilliant in that.
I guess it was 2 years before Jurassic Park, I suppose.
Look, Space Invaders is not high art. It's not deep, but I was entertained by it. When I first read about it in an article about underrated 90s B movie from Screen Rant, I thought, this sounds interesting. I added to my watch list. This was a perfect choice for a first episode of my podcast after recovering from feeling down for a long period of time. I give Space Invaders a 3 out of 5. What do you think of Space Invaders? I kind of wish they made that TV show. Let me know on social media. I want to thank everyone who downloaded and listened to this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Next month, I will be breaking my rule. The first rule. The next movie is kind of popular, but not as popular as Star Wars. However, I always wanted to revisit this film.
Are you Samuel James Witwicky, descendant of Archibald Witwicky?
Yeah?
My name is Optimus Prime. We are autonomous robotic organisms from the planet Cybertron. But you can call us Autobots for short.
You've been listening to Unpopular Sci-Fi, an Atomic Future podcast. RJ's passion is anything sci-fi and anything except mainstream sci-fi. We nerd out and dig into the petty stuff, the fun stuff. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on YouTube at Atomic Future and on Twitter at Atomic_Future. See you next time on Unpopular Sci-Fi.